Greetings, everybody. This is Chris Wilson, Senior Pastor at St. Andrew Christian Church, and here to talk about sermon this coming week. And before I can talk about the sermon specifically for this Sunday begins a new sermon series. And a few pieces to go with that is every July, at least the last several years, I've done a movie-based sermon series. And we'll be doing that again this July, the three middle Sundays of July, the 9th, the 16th, and the 23rd. And the three movies will all be connected to the theme of food. And the sermon series is entitled Crossing Boundaries. So each movie that deals with food also has the theme of crossing boundaries in some unique way. This coming Sunday, the film that is going to be referenced in the sermon is the film Babette's Feast. It is a film from 1987, so it's a little bit of an older film. It's a fascinating film. There's actually, if you go and watch the film, if you've seen the film or you go back or want to watch the film before Sunday, you'll find there's not heavy dialogue. It's actually you have to watch the subtitles to kind of watch to get the English in it. But it takes place with these two sisters that live in a remote part of Denmark along the coast. And along the way, they are gifted with a French refugee woman that comes to live with them. And she ends up being caretaker. And come to find out, she is a pretty good cook along the way. She comes into some money, and she decides to use the money to help prepare a traditional French cuisine for this small community, for these two sisters and the small congregation that they are nurturing. And the two sisters relent for her to be able to provide this meal and to pay for the meal. And the meal opens up a lot of new ways for the sisters as well as this small congregation to reflect about its identity. The congregation, for the most part, was a very pietistic community that limited themselves to lots of pleasures. There was a very simple life and simple food and simple rituals of life. And Babette's meal that she prepares for them, this extravagant meal, opens up to them a new way of reflecting for themselves. So the sermon title I have specifically for the week is Moving from the Ordinary to the Extraordinary. And the scripture comes from Luke chapter 2. And the verses in chapter 22 that we'll be reflecting on is the preparation of the Passover. And in the middle of that passage is where Jesus begins to transform the Passover to a new ritual, which was the blessing of the bread and the blessing of the cup, which ends up what we think of as communion or the Lord's Supper. But Jesus took a meal that was a traditional symbolic meal in the Jewish faith, and in the midst of that, transforms that meal into something different for the disciples and himself and those that were gathered in that household. The disciples would soon discover that what Jesus did on that night in the upper room was not just an ordinary thing, but an extraordinary thing. So we will use the backdrop of Babette's Feast and the theme of that movie and overlay it with the unfolding of the upper room experience and reflect on what it means for things to be ordinary and what takes them to be extraordinary. So I hope you'll join us on Sunday as we launch this new series. If you've not seen the film Babette's Feast, I encourage you to watch it. If you've seen it before, I encourage you to watch it again so you have that as a backdrop for the sermon this week. You do not have to watch it to hear the sermon. It will be a standalone, but you might have a better sense of references in the film if you've seen it. So hope you'll join us on Sunday. It should be a good start to a good series, and we will see you then. Thanks so much.